Hello, my name is Jabari Jones, and welcome to Focus on Fascism. Today, I have the pleasure to introduce to the world Gerald Smith. Gerald, what is the definition of fascism?
Okay. The Webster definition that is in the dictionary is the following: Fascism is a political philosophy, movement, or regime such that of the fascists, like let's say uh, they would say Pinochet was fascist, or a fascist regime, or the Franco regime. But really, it exalts nations and often race above the individual, and that stands for a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, severe economic and social regimentation, and forced suppression of opposition. Now, that is the Webster definition. I would submit to you that that definition is not sufficient because just the definition of fascism is unfortunately very complicated and controversial. To understand fascism and the historical context requires something that we here at Focus on Fascism will provide. And I'll come back to that later. Some of the features of fascism. Let us continue.
Similarities and differences of the far right movement internationally.
Okay. One of the features or how fascism actually acts in the real world is that fascism in part is representing the most venile sector of the what's called the bourgeoisie or the capitalists, which would be the banks. Okay. Now, when insofar as they represent that particular, you know, sector, you would think, therefore, that fascism is the same everywhere in the world. I will just submit to you, in Turkey, I used to think that fascism was only in advanced countries. That's not true. So Turkey had a group called the Grey Wolves. Um, the Ukraine, the fascists were called the Right Sector. They had a website that I actually went to. And then, you know, here in this country, we have, also in Greece, the Golden Dawn. Now, what is the difference between these different fascist movements? Well, for instance, fascism in Italy, where it first took over the whole state apparatus and ran the country for years. In Italy, the fascists did not were not particularly anti-Semitic. Now, in Germany, they were so anti-Semitic and so obsessed by that they literally murdered 6 million Jews. So fascism, in spite of their attempts to placate each other internationally, in fact, it's a very nationalistic movement, and it tends to have the marks of that particular middle class in that particular part of the world.
So, what about the far right movement over here in America? What are the similarities between these groups abroad, like the Golden Dawn, like you mentioned, and the similarities between the far right groups that are here happening here in America to this day? What are the similarities?
Well, I mean, this one, and above all, anti-working class. So what you're gonna find is that the fascists are tending to be against any effort of the working class to improve their lot. They attack strikes, for instance, things like that. So you'll find that similarity. But here's the problem, and we're going to talk about this. In the United States, we have a depleted working class movement. What does that mean? That the American working class does not objectively behave like a working class very much. For instance, they like to criticize China for being undemocratic and stuff like that. There were way more strikes in China than here in the United States. So the ability of the working class or the proletariat to actually resist capital exists more in China than it does here in the United States. You had to look for a damn strike to find a strike in the United States. In China, there were sometimes as many as 400 strikes in a month. So, what do we look for? How do we understand fascism in a country that is not yet in the economic? Many people think that fascism only comes when you have a economic crisis, and therefore the fascists emerge as an alternative. Well, actually, the United States, we're seeing the beginnings of fascism here right now with no working class challenge to power. And there are specific reasons for that, which we will talk about as we go on.
So we are recording this interview on January 13th, 2022. We are 1 week removed from the 1 year anniversary of January 6th. Um, was it an insurrection or was it a coup? Which one was it?
Well, actually, I will refer to our news sources. The NPR, the national news, uh, says it was both, right? I would argue that Democracy Now! Says that it was both. But what was it? We have to use our heads. Was it an insurrection? Well, here's what's clear. Every person that walked into the building or was a part of Trump's uh, support demonstration clearly was not in on any inside information and didn't know very much of what was going on. They were pawns. Many of them were pawns. It is clear that, for instance, a group like the Proud Boys were acting very deliberately and very clearly. They had a plan. So the inner circle of this activity, this riot, had a plan to try to prevent the counting of votes. Okay, that's it. That part is clear. But it when we use the word insurrection, an insurrection is pretty much a political and military type of action to overthrow a government, and it's questionable, whether or not this was, you know, set up to overthrow. It certainly was set up to undermine and to prevent the counting of the votes. So in a strange sense, it may have been a very distant attempt at a coup, but it was so poorly arranged and so poorly planned. When people entered the Capitol, they didn't even, some of them, that's key. Some of them didn't even know why they were there. So they would go and sit in the congressmen's offices and put their feet on the table. And, you know, you say, what is this? Well, they didn't know. Only a select few really understood what they were after. So I look at it more like a mass demonstration where where let's say an anarchist clique has decided that they want to bash windows and use the demonstration as cover for bashing windows. You understand? Because that's basically what happened. A small select crew went on and was trying to subvert the election, the election count, and the other people, I don't even know that they were aware of that at all. So what do you think? It's not it's very blurry. But here's one thing: it was a dress rehearsal, and that's the problem. So we're looking now. One of the hopes is that we use this to build consciousness and an appetite for information on fascism. That's what we want focus on fascism to be. And if you really, really think about it, this it's clear that fascism is on the rise in this country. We have to start paying attention to it. And I can tell you, it's I don't think that people are necessarily aware of this. You have to stop and think about it, you know? So,
What do you think was the underlying goal of the fascist groups that were there, like the Proud Boys, like the Three Percenters? What do you think the ultimate goal was? Was it to get Donald Trump reelected? Was it to start out civil war? Was it for anarchy? What was the stated purpose of the January 6th riot?
well, see, that's part of the problem is that I don't think they all had the same exact aim. So you also had the Boogaloo Boys present. So what do these people do? One, they got their own internal dynamics within each group. Two, there is not a unified fascist party, so to speak. What you have is different fragments: the Proud Boys, the Three Percenters, the Oath Keepers, the Boogaloo Boy, and these people are, I would argue, factions of a proto-fascist movement. They haven't gotten there yet. The alt-right is a part of this. The white supremacists are a part of this. We'll talk about this. Now, I don't know, see, specifically who knew who. This is why this committee to investigate is actually fairly important. And I've been reading some of their findings. And the one thing that comes clear is that the cops and the Klan go hand in hand. What does that mean? That means that they do not deal with these people in a way. If let's say some old derelict, some old black derelict went into the Capitol and peed on the wall. Let's just say if this were to occur, it is clear that this gentleman would probably receive 5 years in prison, besides the terrible whooping that the police would serve him with. Some of the participants in this rally have been given like 6 months. 6 months. And they're trying to identify the actual leaders, which places us in a very strange place because they understand that not everybody that entered the building was fully aware of what the plan was.
What is up with the rise of fascism in this country? What is happening? What is really going on?
Well, all right. Historically and traditionally, what most historians believe is that fascism is a savior of capitalism, that fascism arises on the scene when capitalism is in its death throes, is in its death agony, so to speak. Well, now I I I I generally think that that's valid, but do you think that American capitalism is currently in its death throes? I didn't I kind of missed that memo. I think that American capitalism may have, problems and crises, but apparently it's much deeper than we think. So understand this: fascism, being the last resort of the capitalists, unfortunately will be with us until when? Until capitalism is destroyed,
Mhm.
until capitalism is wiped away off of this earth. You will continue to have fascism. And thus, the program, the real anti fascist program, is to eliminate the source of fascism, which is capitalism.
So, with the rise of fascism in this country, and some of these racist movements, it is quite natural to have racist people joining the military. What is up with the rising rates of racism in the military?
Well, first of all, bro, you know what? Racism has always been in the American military. Yeah, I actually I went on a reading binge about racism in the military, and this is funny. This is not funny. It's it's American. The first black man that graduated from the military academy, West Point, he graduated in 1877. He went to school, and basically nor teachers nor students actually acknowledge his existence. Do you believe this? So
Mhm.
this whole thing is not new. Okay, this is not new. They're comfortable 70% white, 30% black. Now, here's how the military is set up. Because what is the key of the military is the leadership. Okay. So the military academies, well, look, how do blacks face discrimination in the military? According to black people that are both in and veterans of the military, one, it is being passed over by promotions. That's something that particularly irks most people that have been through the military. Or we're talking like people that spend time 10 years or more, and then also the racism in the military discipline. This is something that black people often talk about that have been through that experience. But really, it's the leadership now. We got to concentrate on the leadership. Where's the leadership developed? In the academies, in the military academies. That is the pipeline to the military leadership. It's the academies that provide the cadres that are going to run the military. So, something that you need to know: 70% of the cadets are recruited by the Congress. I didn't know that. I thought you applied to go to this, to West Point. No, they are recruited and appointed by the Congress, senators and congressmen. So right there, you got to think, well, who is, Jim, the various members of Congress going to promote racists because they're racist. Let's not fool ourselves, okay? 70%. I would hear something else that goes on in the military today. The Confederate history is memorialized in the military, in the academies. And I just scratch my head, Jabari, how the Confederacy lost the Civil War. Hello.
Mhm.
But they still, to this day, memorialize the Confederacy at West Point and other military academies. Uh, the military, I mean, I could just go on. So what happens is, it is not so much what you said that people join the military, with this plan of penetrating the military with racist ideas, they are germinated inside of the military. And recently they had to speak to this matter. And some Pentagon creature got up on NPR and he let it out. He said, look, we don't, this is America. We got freedom of speech and freedom of thought. So we're not gonna treat people or penalize people because they like fascism. He said, what we're gonna do is, if you do anything, if you put up a post that says on the internet that says you love killing Jews or something like this, then we would move to slap you on the wrist. But in other words, they basically were stating to the ultra right, you're welcome here in the military, long as you don't get out of line. And what is that line? Well, that line is obviously oppressing and murdering people in their third world countries and the working class and minorities here at home.
Moving on to another subject, can you give a brief description of the militia movement here in the United States, like the rise of the militia movement in the United States and why it's so critical to fascism?
Okay, well, actually, there was a whole period. Well, if you recall, the government under Clinton attacked the Waco compound, and the rules of engagement were they basically murdered everyone in the compound. They set the compound on fire. And in this case, this particular cult in Waco, Texas, they stayed in the property and they died in the property. So after that occurred, there was a understanding that there was a felt need for protection against the government. And so people started banding together, practicing what they considered their Second Amendment rights, and forming militias, or joining the National Guard and collecting their weapons and trying to actually build an actual independent militia. Well, okay. So what you have is that started way back, 90s. It continued. And so today what we have, and remember now, we have automatic weapons you can buy at a gun flea market. You just go and get the weapons. Just go get it. Go to it and don't even have to give valid ID. It's amazing what you're allowed to, the types of weapons you're allowed to procure. But anyway, what you have today is well, we mentioned, by the way, the planning and the practice for kidnapping the governor of Michigan. But let's go on. It's not just that. These people have military maneuvers and have been volunteering with the government. The Department of Homeland Security openly works with the Minutemen, the Oath Keepers, the Three Percenters, openly works with them to do military maneuvers by the border. And it's really difficult, but just know that these people, well, let's talk about like the Boogaloo Boys and what they do. The Boogaloo Boys clearly are involved in, the military, for instance. And what I know intimately, and this is how this Trump thing confuses the issue. On the day that George Floyd was killed, that Friday there was a major demonstration in Oakland. And I think there was probably about 700 people. Yes, I was there, my old ass, and me and Shane and Rick Perez. We kind of looked out for each other. You know, we have to look out for each other at these mass demonstrations. And this was during the pandemic. So we went and huge demonstration. And here's what happened during the demonstration. When we were at 10th and Clay, I was in the back of a truck because I do experience a little, difficulty walking, so I wanted to keep up. All of a sudden, shots broke out, and the demonstration was a block over because when you have a throng of people, it's not just the demonstrations in one place. Well, what we found out, we decided to exit stage left when we heard the gunshots. We weren't prepared, for that. It winds up that a member of the Boogaloo Boys murdered two federal guards, both of whom were black.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what blew my mind? And this is when we say the cops and the Klan go hand in hand. The media reporters, they're not reporters. There is such a thing as fake news. When they were asking questions to the policeman, it winds up that this particular guy, they caught him, and then he had also murdered an officer
In
in
Santa
San
Cruz.
Jose.
No, Santa Cruz.
Oh, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon, brother. Excuse me, Santa Cruz. And so what happened here is the media, instead of searching for an answer, looking for an answer, they wanted to insert and change the direction of the investigation. They kept saying, well, these people, the people that carried out these murders, were part of the demonstration, were they?
Or
And
Antifa.
the
Specifically
police said
Antifa.
no. And they kept asking the same question. And finally, the police, you could see he got annoyed at the press conference, and he said, look, these people came to kill the police. They were not part of the rally.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that would stop then? The one thing I say about these Trump people, they persisted because they tried to create confusion even after it was in the newspaper as to the identity of the gentleman that killed the police, his organizational affiliation, Boogaloo Boys. They still tried to say that the demonstrators, it's just like today, they 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 try to say that the Antifa and Black Lives Matter, look, Black Lives Matter penetrated the Trump demonstration and was responsible for the so-called insurrection and the coup. You have to, the brain damage that you have to carry within you in order to allow things like that to come out of your mouth is astounding. It's astounding. Everybody knows. Well, no, see, that's everybody doesn't know. Our job is to see to it that more and more people understand. And that's what Focus on Fascism is all about.
And in conclusion, do you have anything else to say about fascism and maybe what we will talk about later on in future episodes?
Yeah, I wanted to say when I had earlier said that the dictionary definition of fascism is not sufficient, you know, there is something to be said about the cult of action for action's sake, which dictates that action is a value itself and should be taken without intellectual reflection. This says, in America, we have a tradition of anti intellectualism. And to a certain degree, it shows. So, for instance, um, racism is totally irrational, but in fact, it is the law of the land, isn't it? In reality, the unwritten law of the land. So we have work to do to try to clarify and straighten out some of the thinking processes of the working people who we love and get at them and help them overcome and surmount the confusion that is America.
Thank you so much, Gerald, for this wonderful discussion about fascism. Here at Focus on Fascism, we strive to bring you the most relevant information about fascism globally. So please join us. We will bring you more content. Like I will be the next host for the next video podcast, our inaugural podcast, or video podcast, whatever you want to call it, about fascist things that are happening in this world. Thank you to our guest, Gerald Smith, longtime political activist, part of the socialists. What's the name of the party that you're associated with?
I'm associated with the Democratic Socialists of America.
Exactly.
I'm a member of that group.
And we will bring you relevant content, in the form of video podcasts to short films to these live discussions. So please join us for future content. Thank you so much.